Welcome back, guys. So today for episode 4, we have Tyge again. Tyge, how we doing today?
Fantastic. How are you?
Fantastic. Doing good, man. It's a great day. Got the sun out, and so far so good.
It's August.
Huh?
It is August.
It is August. We're last month of summer, basically. So make sure you guys go do your fun stuff. So today, I think we wanted to go in more depth of nutrition. Okay, so is there anything you wanted to start with?
A little bit like food stuff, and then hopefully like a little bit of training stuff at the end. We got like a couple questions at the end, I think.
Yeah, most definitely.
But we were going to talk a little bit about food, like expand on the protein side of stuff.
Okay.
And then hopefully you can ask questions along and stop me where I start rambling.
Yes, I will do that.
And then we can go like a little bit of carbs, and then like what fiber, and then maybe like a little bit of fats.
Okay.
And then the different types of fats and why they're super helpful. So we talked a little bit like protein last time, and then like certain amounts of protein per meal. So like that kind of threshold of like where you step over like usable protein amounts for somebody, and like that protein amount being like, depending on how much muscle tissue you have, like depends on your age, depends on a bunch of stuff. And like how, like, let's say you have a threshold of 50 grams of protein per meal, and it's going to vary person to person, but like 50 grams of protein per meal, and anything above that is going to get turned into energy. And it's kind of like an inefficient energy source.
Okay.
And so like we have this maximal muscle protein synthesis window that we kind of hit sort of per meal, and then having multiple boluses per day is super, super handy on that.
Boluses as in
like 50 grams of protein per meal.
So you have to make sure it's like the exact amount. It can't be more.
Yeah, it can be more.
Okay.
Like it's okay if it's more. Like you overshooting it a little bit, you're probably going to be fine.
Okay.
But it's like trying not to like do too little in one sitting.
Oh, okay.
Because if you do too little, then you're not going to maximize muscle growth.
Oh,
and so doing like a little bit too much is sometimes ideal for like a lot of people, especially because like protein has a thing where it's got like a high TEF, or like the thermal effect of food.
Thermal effect of food.
Yeah, TEF. Okay. So basically each category of foods like protein, carbs, and fats, they have a certain amount that your body has to use energy wise to make it use, like to be able to use it, right? So it has to take X amount of energy, a percentage away from it to be able to be consumed and then used and then to do whatever its job may be. So like to some theory-ish aspect, like 20 to 30% of like your daily metabolism of energy is used to build muscle protein, or like to build protein synthesis related things. So like enzymes or hormones or muscle tissue or skin, hair, nails, like all that kind of stuff. It takes energy to do all that because that's protein synthesis.
Okay, that makes sense then. Okay.
Yeah. So you have all of those things that are present, and it's like you want to maximize that protein bolus so you can like maximize muscle growth. And so like for theory, like if you have, 100 grams of protein and it has a roughly like 20% thermal effect of food. So it takes like 20% of the energy that you could get from it to actually use it as energy. Whereas like the other portion of it can just be used to build proteins.
Okay.
And then carbs is like 98%, and like fats is like almost 100%. Like carbs like 95 to 98%, and then fats is like almost 100% of the energy that you consume of it.
So real quick, so fats and carbs is energy, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And protein can be used as energy if it needs to be, but ideally it's going to get used as building proteins or building muscle tissue.
Okay. So one question that they probably have that I have is, how do you find out which individual, how much they need and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's like kind of a guesstimation. So it's an educated guess on like working with people for an extended period of time. Like age is going to play a role into it. So like as you get older, you have what's called anabolic resistance, or basically it takes slightly more protein to get the job done to build the muscle tissue.
Okay.
Whereas like a younger person is going to be more efficient at using the protein. So like age plays a factor into it. Gender plays a factor into it. How much muscle tissue they have plays a factor into it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's a bunch, right? So you're not going to, obviously the 60-year-old lady that's, 115 pounds isn't going to have the same protein as a 230-pound bodybuilder.
I mean, that
makes base sense, right?
Yeah.
So, but now like in comparison, like gram for gram, like gram per pound of body weight, they might be like closer than the guy who weighs, 285 pounds and he just works out. He doesn't even really work out. And the bodybuilder that's 230 pounds. Like the older lady might have a higher protein need than the guy, the 230-pound protein guy, like grams per pound of body weight, right?
Right. Okay.
So like the older lady has anabolic resistance going on. She has some other factors that's going to make it harder to build muscle tissue. So having a little bit more of it present can help her build a little bit more muscle tissue. And like the leanness of like someone is going to dictate how much protein they have, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have, visible abs, you can
Mhm.
kind of start using the like 1 gram plus of scale to like have their protein needs, right? So yours is over like 300 grams right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're much closer to like the 1.2 to 1.4 grams. But if you take somebody and they're a little bit more overweight and they've got a little bit of other stuff going on and they're like 240 pounds, like you might be closer to like the 0.9 or the like 1 point scale, like 1.1 gram per pound of body weight or 0.9 per gram of body weight, because
0.9. Okay.
they have a lot more body fat present. And so they don't have as much lean mass. And so they're not going to need nearly as much protein.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So because that's another struggle I'm sure overweight people have. They think that the more proteins, the better. And you're saying in this sense, it's not always the case.
It's not always the case.
Okay.
But it's usually a little bit better to have too much protein than not enough, as long as it's coming from like lean sources.
Lean sources. Okay.
Yeah. So like the big difference between like a ribeye steak
Yep.
and shrimp is like how much fat content's inside of it.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
100 grams of each is going to be worth very, very significantly different in calories.
Oh.
So if someone's eating a little bit too much protein, that's not particularly a bad thing. I'd rather you have a little bit too much than not enough.
Of course.
But that'll keep you fuller longer. Same thing with like carbohydrates. They're going to keep you fuller a little bit longer, kind of, sort of, right? Especially if it's from fibrous sources.
Okay.
Now, like if you drink 10 grams of olive oil, that's 100 calories. You're not going to notice that at all.
No, it's going to go right through.
Oh, so fast. But
Sheesh.
so like kind of depending on how much protein you need per person, super important. But with that all being said, it like just factors in that like person dependence. So like the whole like, oh, everybody needs 1 gram per pound of body weight, like isn't fully true. Like there's that sliding scale.
Yeah.
If you have someone who's pretty overweight, like, female, all that kind of stuff, using their ideal body weight is usually a pretty good metric.
Okay.
So like falling into like, hey, ideally I'd be 130 pounds. It's really hard for me to eat throughout the day. I don't have a big appetite. Like getting them at least 130 grams.
Okay.
Is a great spot to be, because then they're still going to maximize building muscle tissue, but there's still going to be a calorie deficit. And so they're still going to strip off the body fat.
Okay.
Versus trying to get that 200-pound lady to eat 200 grams of protein might be a really big challenge.
Right, and that makes sense. So another question I have is when it comes to proteins or when it comes to carbs and fats, is it you're gonna give them an amount based on their goals? So like if someone wants to lose weight, they're probably gonna have less, or how do you gauge that? Yeah,
so it's super dependent. Usually the big manipulating factor is going to be mostly carbohydrates that you manipulate the most of.
Okay.
But like sometimes a little bit of fats too. Like especially in contest prep, you'll see that fat number start creeping down.
Yeah.
The RDA is roughly like 15 to 30% of calories come from fats.
RDA?
Yeah, recommended daily allowance.
Okay.
And that's through like the government to some degree, with quotations. But those are like recommended amounts. So like women usually try and sit a little bit higher on that scale, like contest prep, that kind of stuff. It's going to be a little bit different.
Okay.
But it's usually like finding their protein number, finding kind of their fat number, and then being able to work in their carb numbers and like having all of it be the food that they like.
Okay.
So like your main source is like, okay, number one, we have to hit your protein goal. Like that's that's one of the things that you have to do.
Of course.
Like roughly 15 to 30% of your daily intake of calories is going to be coming from fat or fat sources. That includes your protein source. So like if you have, your ribeye, for example, like you're going to count that amount of grams of fat inside that meat towards the totally daily fat.
Oh, okay.
But then leaning a little bit more towards like your poly and monounsaturated fats when making a diet plan is usually the ideal sources. Like you're trying to limit your daily intake of saturated fats.
So would ribeye have saturated fats in it?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to make sure that it's coming from a cleaner source of fats.
Yeah, usually when it's a little bit leaner, it's going to be a little bit better for you.
Okay.
Usually, because it's going to be like the white stuff. So like you have saturated fat, you have trans fat, you have polyunsaturated fat, and you have monounsaturated fats. So saturated fat isn't particularly bad for you in small amounts. Like having some inside your diet is pretty important. It's pretty hard to avoid entirely.
Right.
Because there's going to be small amounts in every single thing that you have. And like saturated fats is this really fancy fat molecule, and all the carbons are saturated. Like they all are saturated with hydrogens. And so it's a saturated fat. They're saturated with hydrogens. And so it's this cool little molecule. It's like these chains that go back and forth. And each one of those have a hydrogen on them. Two hydrogens on them. Okay. And so then that way they're saturated with hydrogens.
Huh.
Trans fats have this like really, really interesting chemical that like, not chemical, but they have this really interesting bond that does this really not great thing for human health. And so those were banned in 2013 and officially like you're not allowed to add them into food at all. Officially in 2018.
So like, what are some really bad health effects from it?
Just cardiovascular disease, buildup of plaque was really, really prevalent. Like all those things seem to be correlated because it's not like really a naturally occurring fat. You have to do this not crazy, but you have to do this like specialized process in a facility to like kind of create this non-supernatural bond inside of things. And so it's a little bit found in the world. Like we can't completely avoid it. It's just not super common.
It's just not jacked up anymore.
Yeah, where they were adding a lot of stuff into trans fats because it made it shelf stable significantly longer. And so like the shelf stability of the food lasted way longer, but like the health causes and negative side effects of it were like, oh no, let's avoid that.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say so that's probably why like a lot of fast food restaurants kind of changed in taste for some cases. Like some people said that when they immediately got rid of those fats that they noticed a slight change, maybe around like from like the 90s and so on.
They officially banned it in 2018. Yeah, so they officially banned it in 2013, and then they had a full effect, and so now it's absolutely not allowed in foods to be added starting 2018.
Okay.
So it could have changed for sure, but I haven't made that much fast. I can't remember 10 years ago either.
No.
But and so then you have like poly and monounsaturated fats, and they have this cool chain. So like saturated fats are usually this block, and so you can stack them really, really prettily. And that's why on meats, most of the time at room temperature, that white fat on them, that's going to be saturated fat.
That's saturated fat.
So that's solid at room temperature.
Okay, so like when I cook ground beef and then it settles in, that white stuff is the saturated fat.
More than likely.
Yeah, okay.
There's still a little bit of mono and polyunsaturated fat in meats. But that white stuff is more than likely saturated fat.
It's like that white little film?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if you get a ribeye steak and you can see that white crustal on it, that's so delicious. That's saturated fats.
Okay.
Where like olive oil and coconut oil is a good example because if you leave a bottle of coconut oil on the countertop, it'll stabilize and it'll actually be solid at room temperature.
Right.
But if you put it in your hands, it'll go back to liquid because it has a little bit more of the mono and polyunsaturated fats.
So that's mono and polysaturated fats.
Yeah, those are going to be liquid at room temperature.
Liquid at room temperature.
Yeah, so olive oil, avocado oil, those things are going to be that liquid at room temperature.
So are those going to be the healthier ones then?
Yeah, those are going to be the ones that are better for you.
Awesome.
Better for you. They're the ideal ones that you want to have in the diet the most of.
Okay.
And so like those are super good to have inside of a diet because those kind of help training performance to some degree. But then they also kind of offset some cardiovascular stuff that if you have a buildup, they're the ones that's going to help your lipid profile go into the good cholesterol and not so much the bad cholesterol.
So it kind of balances everything out.
LDL and HDL.
Okay.
So you can support the good cholesterol by having a little bit more of the mono and polyunsaturated fats.
Okay. So when you're, I do apologize if you mentioned it. I just want to make sure we get it said. When you're figuring out how much fat somebody needs, what do you go based off of that?
So you take the total calories that you're going to have them do.
Yes.
You get your protein number out of there.
Okay.
And then the total calories that you have is going to range from 15 to 30% of their daily calories is going to come from fats. So you just take the total calories that they have.
Total calories.
And then you times it by 0.15 and 0.3. And then that'll give you how much calories you should have from fats.
Okay, perfect. I just want to kind of reiterate that so that way people can for sure.
And then that'll give you the calorie number that you need. And then you can divide that by 9. And then that'll give you the amount of grams of fat that you need.
Perfect.
Yep. Perfect. So that's when you build a diet. You can kind of use that stuff. And then you kind of fill in the rest with carbohydrates to some degree.
That makes sense. Okay.
Leaning like a little bit, depending like if someone's gaining or trying to lose, like that's when you're going to kind of decide if they're going to lean a little bit more towards the veggies and the starches, or if they're going to lean a little bit more towards the like heavy starches, lighter veggies, lighter fiber. If you're trying to lose weight, usually it's a little bit better to lean towards the stuff that's going to be high in fiber.
High in fiber?
Yep.
And why is that?
Because that's going to keep you fuller significantly longer.
Okay.
That's going to stabilize your blood sugar a little bit better. And that's going to be able to have a larger volume of food.
Okay.
So if you take 100 calories of rice versus 100 calories of broccoli, you're going to have significantly more broccoli than you will rice.
Right.
And so when someone gets to sit down, like, oh man, I get a choice between eating these two things. Like, oh man, I'm not hungry at all. You're going to probably lean to the rice.
Yes.
If you're like, oh man, I'm really, really hungry, you're probably going to lean to the broccoli.
That makes sense, though. I can see that. Yeah.
And so when you're doing that, you're just kind of deciding how hungry the person is, and then being able to kind of shift that a little bit. If they're like, man, I am starving, it's like, all right, let's add a little bit more veggies in there. Let's keep you full a little bit longer.
Right.
Or like, man, I am really, really, really full. It's like, okay, let's push your rice volume up to some degree. But like when you're gaining, it can be really hard because like you've run into it. You're going to run into a place where you can't physically eat any more food.
Right.
And so then there's the fun thing of like, okay, like let's push that number up to a certain point. But then it's like, okay, now like I can't eat anymore. Let's pull it back down a little bit and then use like lower volume foods like intra-workout Gatorade, the super carb, highly branched cluster dextrins. Let's get that inside your diet plan. Let's get like a sugary thing that you like the taste of. Let's start using rice-based cereal because roughly 100 grams of that is 100 grams of carbs.
Oh, wow.
Which is like almost 400 calories, but it's super tasty and like
easy to get down.
Yeah, anybody can put down. 90% of people can put down 100 grams of cereal pretty easily. And so like all those things start to play a role. It's like, okay, now you're super full during your lunchtime, but you still need more calories because you're just maintaining weight. It's like, okay, let's pull down the rice a little bit. Let's add a little bit of honey or something into it.
Huh.
And like stuff like that can kind of help them, or like olive oil, like things like that to add into their diets to be able to like have the total daily amount of calories that they're having to
a little bit easier.
Yep, to go higher, but then they don't feel as bad because they're not as full.
So how long do you think, like, so in my case, for instance, too, like how long do you think until we get to that point, do you think? Like, I mean, or is it more just based on week by week?
It's super based week by week.
Okay.
Like we had just talked about the other day, like we had to do 3 days on lower carb.
Yep.
Because we had some stuff going on. But we had to do 3 days of lower carb, and like all of a sudden you're like, dude, my appetite is crazy back again. And so it just depends on the person. Like I've seen some cool things where you can pull somebody down in calories for just one singular week out of the year. You got 51 other ones to be fine at 1 week, and that can respike their appetite going back crazy.
That makes sense.
Or you can lower the volume of food, the total quantity of food that they're eating. You can make it less, but make it worth more calories. And then trying to drive their body weight up through like multiple different assets like that, finding foods that they really like, like 2 Rice Krispies instead of 1 Rice Krispie before you work out, like all those things, but it kind of evolves week by week of what they can handle. And you might have the same food for somebody over 4 or 5 weeks, might be eating the same thing. On week 1, they're starving, but at the end of week 5, they're like, bro, I cannot put another bite down. And so you have to be kind of willing to ebb and flow with them a little bit and like find tactics and stuff that works. But yeah, now if it's the opposite thing where you're just like, hey man, you're like super low calorie, like trying to find a lot of cool things that they actually will eat on a regular basis and is huge in a coaching perspective. And then 2, like giving them a little bit of flexibility with like macro tracking kind of sort of, but being able to find like, oh man, like, I really want to do asparagus and I really want to do this. And then finding the foods that you can have a large quantity of and stay full from a lot longer, but still hit the daily calories where it's like, I need you to be under this number, but I need your protein to be here. I need your calories to be here and carbs here.
Right.
And then that'll keep them trending downwards. In the long term, is super helpful. So, but that's that like communication with your coach, or if you're doing it yourself, it can be a big challenge because you're like, oh no, I just need a refeed this week. And it's like, that'll spike my appetite or that'll make this. And it's like, no, you really just needed to hammer through. Like, so.
Well, that's the importance of having a coach too, and then making sure you communicate well. And I think low key, something that I had an issue with for a while is like admitting that I was struggling getting food down for whatever reason. I used to think like, oh, it's like you're supposed to just get it down, but that's actually something you want to let your coach know.
Because there's a lot of tactics and there's a lot of things that we can do and there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of changing and there's like a lot of things that I can use if I know exactly what's going on. But if I like, oh, you didn't send your check-in and you didn't really tell me that you were super hungry, you didn't tell me this, that, or the other, or you're having the problems, like I can't really do anything to fix it if I don't know that the problem's there.
Right. Like
if you're like, hey man, today I'm really full and it just really sucks today. It's like, okay, let's grind out the rest of today and let's see how you feel tomorrow. But if you notice it's like a progressive kind of problem, then it's something that you can address and adjust.
That makes sense. Okay.
So, but you only know what you know from the person if they tell you. Like you can't just be like, hey, like what's going on here? Like, but like when you start like repeatedly missing meals or you start doing this, or like if oh man, I'm just really, really, really full, like you kind of hear that often, like those are keys that you want to pick up on, like a coaching perspective, to be like, hey, like we can adjust here, or we can adjust there, or we can keep you fuller with this, or we can, make you hungrier with this, or if we need to cut down a meal because of that, like there's a lot of things that we can do. You just have to make sure that they know that that's what's going on.
That makes sense. So what happens if someone consistently like misses 1 meal a day or something, like they throw that off? Can that change the whole thing?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
So like like roughly, like let's just assume one meal is 500 calories.
Right.
And you're missing one meal every single day. You're missing a full pound of weight gain a week.
Oh,
right? Like
yeah.
a 500 calorie meal is 3,500 calories at the end of the week. And that's technically 1 pound of mass. Like that's 1 pound of physical mass to you, whether it be, you know, a little bit more bone, a little bit more muscle tissue, a little bit more fat. It's probably a combination of everything. But it's 1 pound roughly. And so if you're missing that every single day, that adds up a lot. And it might not even be like they're, you know, they might be super busy at work.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, let's plan for you to miss, like, let's chat, let's plan for you to miss that meal. Let's get rid of that meal and we'll just add the other meals to be bigger.
Okay, so you can do that.
You can do that and you can make things work. Or it's like, hey man, let's, you know, hey, you're trying to push up your body weight, you're at 5,000 calories and you keep missing this meal because you're super, super, super full and you're super busy and you can't hit it. It's like, okay, let's make it a shake then. Let's blend up some oatmeal, let's blend up some almond butter, let's blend up some protein powder, let's blend up some berries because you need some fruits and vegetables in your diet. Please to God have fruits and vegetables in your diet. Like you need those things in there because that's going to help, like for a myriad of reasons, but we'll get to that in a second. Don't let me forget. But let's get you a 500 calorie shake in there that you're going to digest just fine and then be able to get that down and then you're still hitting that daily calorie intake.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you're going to be able to kind of still progress that 1 pound instead of just being like, I can't do that meal, so I give up kind of thing. Like,
well, then there you guys go. There's the question that people have asked before. Can you get away with missing meals? No, you cannot.
Yeah.
If anything, do exactly what he said and talk to your coach and communicate what you can do to make that plan work for you. 100%.
Because I think that's a huge portion of it is like anybody can set out like, oh, eat this many calories and have this much protein a day. Like anybody can do that.
Absolutely.
But it's like, how high do you want to sit on the pyramid of like results, right?
Yep.
Like there's like calories and then above that it's going to be your macronutrients and then above that's your meal timing. Like if you're trying to like be the best that you can be, like the top of the pyramid's meal timing, but that can play a role in your long-term progress.
Yes.
And so like, and even like kind of sort of short-term progress too. Like it'll keep you fuller, keep blood sugar better, it'll keep your, you know, protein synthesis numbers hitting higher. That's why you don't try and stack meals together if you can.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole bunch of factors that go into it. But maximizing your results is the meal timing portion of it. And so like if you can maximize all those factors, you're going to get much better results as if you were just following the calories or just following the macros.
And that makes sense. And I think that I can attest to that myself too, because like I eat every three hours on the dot every single day.
Yeah.
And I don't notice any problems with that.
Yeah. And like other people was like, you know, hey, the best I can do is 4 meals a day. It's like, perfect. Can you do 4 meals a day in a shake? And they're like, no, I can only do 4 meals. And it's like, okay, let's just work with the best we can. Or, hey, I can only do 3 meals. It's like, okay, can you do 3 meals in a shake? And they're like, yeah, I can do that. And it's like, okay, then let's work with that. Because you're still spreading that protein out over each 4 different times instead of 3 different times or 2 different times. Like you're maximizing those results.
Okay.
And that's why I'm not like a huge fan of fasting. Like I think that it's fine, but if you're trying to bodybuild or you're trying to maximize muscle retention or you maximize muscle growth, like I think it might hurt you a little bit longer in the long term. And there is a little bit of research that shows like if you spread out your meal timing a little bit better, you have a little bit more muscle tissue preservation or muscle. Usually the studies are in weight loss, so
okay,
you have slightly more muscle preservation than you do if you were just like fasting and only having, you know, your 150 grams of protein in a 2-hour window.
Oh, jeez.
You can spread that out through over 4 or 5 different boluses or 4 or 5 different meals. Like that can help you maximize because you're hitting that muscle protein threshold.
Well, and I'm sure your levels in your body is going to be a lot stabilized too, instead of just like waiting, boom, and then waiting again. I can just imagine that'd be kind of a mess.
Yeah. And again, like if that's what like works for you and that's what you really want to do, like that is something that we can work with for sure. But like, you know, you might not be getting as good of results as you possibly can. But if you're like, hey man, I'm 370 pounds, like I just need to get the weight off me as much as possible. And I just want 1 big meal a day. Like we can kind of work with that, but there's some things that you're going to want to make sure that you have. Like you're going to want to make sure that when you're eating is around your workout window. Because if you're, let's say you work out at 6 a.m. and your meal's at 6 p.m., like you could have eaten up a lot of muscle tissue in the time frame.
That's bad.
And then you don't go into the gym with any energy and then you can't get a good pump or you can't get a good workout. It's like, oh no, like you're kind of missing some stuff. So trying to make sure that you work out in your fasting window at least is super helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we were talking about, and then fruits and vegetables too. Please God, have fruits and vegetables in your diet. There's fiber. Fiber is super good for the GI tract. That's super good for microbiome. Like your gut microbiome, there's a whole bunch of bacteria inside there. And that stuff feeds off of fiber. Oh,
so the fiber helps the process of that then.
Yeah. So when you eat fiber, You don't like you don't fiber is kind of what makes your poop.
Yeah.
To some degree, right?
That makes sense. Yes.
And so like you don't really break that stuff down, and you don't really absorb some of it. Like you might absorb percentages of it, but not a large. So that's what passes through your GI tract, and that's what pulls in water, that pulls in a bunch of stuff, and that kind of helps you get rid of certain things. But that also feeds your gut microbiome. And so there's like all these, like you can think that there's, as weird as it sounds, there's a tube that connects from one side to the other side. Certain things go on one side and they come out the other side, but there's a whole bunch of bacteria in between you and that other side of you that does a lot of cool stuff. So there's some cool things. They're called short chain fatty acids and long chain fatty acids. There's a whole bunch of medium chain fatty acids, or triglycerides too. But they have like all these cool things. And the gut microbiome gets fed by fiber. And if you have a lot of fiber and healthy foods that are, the generally good for you things, it creates a slightly different gut microbiome that seems to help sustain health and blood sugar and sort like a lot of good stuff like that. Now, if you eat like a really westernized American diet a large portion of the time, you're going to have a slightly different gut microbiome or different bacteria that's inside of your gut that might actually turn certain stuff into more fatty acids to when you're getting not more calories out of it, but you're breaking it down and getting slightly more stuff out of it than you might if you were eating a more traditional,
that's wild.
healthy diet.
Yeah. So, when finding out how much fiber someone needs, again, like how do you approach that?
Yeah, I usually try and go for like just going towards the RDA. So like 20 to 30 grams a day for somebody.
Okay. Yeah.
And that can be through like a whole bunch of different ways. That can be through like just general food. It can be through general food plus supplementation. It can be just through supplementation if they need it to be, but I don't like just doing it that way.
Yeah, of course.
Like you'll get, a good amount from, fruits and vegetables and berries and stuff like that. And so you always see fruits, you always see berries, you always see probably pineapple in a meal plan.
Yeah, this guy loves his pineapple.
I do love pineapple. Yeah, it's got a couple of cool different things with it too. So like pineapple specifically has like a decent amount of fiber per serving. It's super, super tasty for 90% of people because it's slightly higher in carbohydrates. So it has slightly more sugars, so it kind of hits the sweet tooth throughout the day. But then it also has I can't remember if it's an enzyme or a protein, but it's brolamine, and so that helps actually break down proteins. Like, as weird as it sounds, if you ever get like a fresh pineapple and you cut it open, you eat a large amount of it, you kind of get a weird feeling in your mouth. Yeah. And that's because pineapple's eating you while you eat it. And so it breaks down the proteins in the inside of your mouth a little bit. To eat a large amount. Okay. And so like it helps break down proteins a little bit. And so that can help some people's digestion when they're eating like red meat and stuff.
Oh, that's wild. So that's why like with red meats, you have pineapple for the most part.
Not every single time.
Not everybody, but most.
And not everything, but yeah, a lot of the time.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense than why it was with red meat. I mean, that just makes sense to me.
Yeah, so there's like a little bit of a rationale. Like some people have a harder time breaking down red meat. Some people have zero problem with it, but some other people have slightly harder times with it. Yeah. And so breaking down, making it a little bit easier on your stomach acid and all that kind of stuff, like it can be beneficial for people. Yeah. So, but like berries and all that stuff also have like antioxidants. They reduce oxidative stress. Which isn't super particularly good for you. Like some oxidative stress is, like some stuff related to exercise is oxidative stress. Okay. But getting antioxidants, so like fruits and vegetables and all that kind of stuff, and berries, they help a lot with preventing oxidative stress, and that can make it easier on your body.
So it's almost performance enhancing to an extent?
Not really. It's actually like... It's interesting because exercise causes stress, and it causes like some reactive oxygen species and like some reactive nitrogen species. Okay. So ROS or RNS, and you actually need that stuff to build muscle tissue. So part of that is actually from like what causes the pump. Is there's a buildup of like hydrogen ions to some degree. And that stuff you need to build up to actually create and induce muscle tissue hypertrophy to some degree. Like it's not like 100% set stone science because there's still a lot of things that go into it. But one of them is metabolic stress. And that metabolic stress can be caused by those two things. We're getting into the weeds for sure.
Yeah, we are.
But like that's if you eat like large amounts of things that reduce oxidative stress, like you might have a slightly blunted hypertrophy result. Very, 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 very slight.
Very, very slight.
Yeah, very slight difference. Still eat your fruits and vegetables because they're good for you. But
Yeah, so yeah, right.
It's like
Don't let that be an excuse.
slight asterisk. Yeah, it's like don't slam a gallon of pomegranate juice after your workout.
Oh, I don't even know if that would even taste good after a workout.
Yeah, probably not. But it tastes really good by itself.
That's true.
Yeah, those are some interesting things.
Okay. Yes. Questions? I'm trying to think of how I would ask, because sometimes, even when I talk to him, even outside of the podcast, I'm just trying to like process.
I get the like glazed over look every once in a while, and I'm like, oh no, I went too far.
Oh no, you're fine, because the funny, cool thing about this is people can like constantly keep backtracking, and then
Yeah, look over it again.
yeah, and I might even do the same thing, just for future episodes. But I had a question about diet again, but it kind of slipped. I'm not gonna lie.
Protein,
carbs. So we went over protein, carbs, and fats, and then fiber. And you recommend. So we're kind of doing a little recap. You recommend fiber from fruits and vegetables, and not as much from supplements.
No, I do recommend it from supplements, and I do recommend it from fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
I don't think it's a bad thing to supplement at all, especially if you're having some problems with the bathroom or having a hard time going or whatever it may be. There's a combination of things that you look for. One of them is definitely hydration factor too. So like if you're having a harder time going to the bathroom, like I definitely will recommend a supplement powder, because for like it can take for certain people a lot of volume of food to get that much fiber in a day.
Right.
And so being able to kind of custom that amount with like fiber supplements aren't particularly bad.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think even when I was in prep, we had that issue like 6 to 4 weeks out. I was just like, hey, dude, like we need to do something, because you're like, well, I can't really add anything in here, so we're just gonna have to go with the supplement.
Yeah, and there's definitely things that go into that too, where it's like at the end of prep, you just don't have very much volume of food.
No,
and so
not at all.
Even if you try and get your fiber amount, your body's doing everything it can to get every ounce of energy out of that.
And like you said too, when you have such low volume of food, your body's already gonna have a hard time with that anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like getting through that discomfort until more food comes in.
Yeah, the bathroom does not work super well the last 3 weeks of the show.
Not at one bit. It was like, oh, okay, this is how it's gonna go.
Like, I am so sorry, and there's very, very little things that you can do about it.
Then you just gotta trudge through it, 100%.
Get her done. But if you're like not in prep and you're having that problem, there's a lot of things that you can do to offset it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I don't ever, obviously when we're eating a surplus of food, I don't have that problem anymore, unless I eat certain types of food and stuff. One question I had is more on a supplement question. Protein powders. Why do a lot of people struggle with? Why does that wreck their GI tract?
Yeah, this is a great question.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff when it comes to protein powder. So just going off of listing like 5 off the top of my head.
Yeah.
You have like animal-based protein powders. You have whey-based protein powders. And whey-based protein powders being, one's higher in lactose. You have a hydrolyzed isolate, that's the lowest amount. You have an isolate, and then you have a whey concentrate. You have a casein protein powder, which is like slower digesting, and that's just a couple of them. You also have your vegan sources. You also have vegetarian sources. You have egg-based protein powders.
Oh, wow.
Egg white-based protein powders. So there's a whole bunch of different protein. That was just 8 off the top of my head, right?
Jeez.
And so like finding a protein powder is great because it can help maximize your protein intake throughout the day, especially like post-workout. Like if you're anything like us to some degree and can have a harder time eating after your workout, like after a really hard leg day, and you're like, ugh, nothing sounds good. Let's get something in here. Like protein powder is a great option. If you're really, really, really hungry throughout the day, don't use a protein powder. Eat like real food. It's not going to make that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. Okay. Especially if you're like, oh, I'm going to trail off my diet and not follow the diet because I'm super hungry. And so like getting rid of protein powders at some point can be super helpful for some people. Other people turn it, like get real fancy with it, turn it into pancakes and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But what I recommend to most people is going to be a hydrolyzed isolate.
Hydrolyzed isolate.
Yeah. It's the orange bottles at Rule 1. That's the one that I recommend the most just because I think it tastes the best. Or like Chris Bumstead's isolate protein. Which is the best name ever that you could have came up with. I love it. But those are going to be like isolate and hydrolyzed isolates. So they're going to have the least amount of carbs and fats inside of them. Okay. So when they do their processing system, it goes through multiple layers of processing. So a lot of people have a problem with lactose. It's galactose and glucose combined together as the sugar molecule.
Galactose and
glucose.
Glucose, okay.
Yep, combined together, and that's what makes lactose.
Huh. Okay.
And so a lot of people have a problem breaking down lactose because they're missing the enzyme lactase. And I know this is too far, but that's okay.
No, you're fine. Keep going.
So it breaks that. So lactase breaks that down. And that's why they have lactate, which is a pill that you can take. That's the enzyme that breaks down lactose for you.
Oh, that it replenishes it, or it's that.
Yeah, it gives you the enzyme.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, so that people rip lactate for the big old, like the super lactose intolerant people will rip one of those before they do, because then their body can break down that sugar. And so that protein powder is the one that has the least amount of carbs inside it. It has super negligible amount of carbohydrates inside of it. So you don't end up having the bathroom problem because you're not having the lactose.
That makes sense. Okay.
And then you can consume that protein powder and be fine. Where someone who's super lactose intolerant, they can't have lactose. And so when they have the blue bottle, or they have something that's like a whey concentrate, then you can look inside the label and there's a lot more sugars inside of it.
Oh, okay.
Like there's like 5 grams of sugar in it, which like isn't a lot. But if you're very sensitive to it, then that can mess up your stomach, and that's what can cause diarrhea effects.
That does make a lot of sense, because some people are like, well, dude, like I can have this one and be fine, but then I have any of these, it's like a problem. I don't know why. There we go. Yeah. And so like that's the big kicker between protein powders. So like, let's say you're just one of those like you're the outlier people that if they just smell lactose in the air, they have a bathroom problem, right? You have egg white protein. Okay.
Or you have animal protein. So then you, depending on what brand you get, there is a carnivore protein. My friend was like deathly allergic to dairy products. Like literally like he would have like chocolate chips and like that would start his throat closing.
Oh no.
And so he got a special brand when we were overseas that was animal based. It tasted terrible.
Yeah.
But it was animal based, and so he wouldn't have any problems, so he could still supplement his protein levels into a good amount.
Okay, that makes sense though.
Yeah. When we were on deployment, it was just super hard to find high quality meat. We didn't have any kitchens or anything. So then he would use that as his source of protein, or one of his sources of protein, when he wasn't able to eat enough food. And then egg white protein is kind of a similar thing. Depends on the person. If you drink too much egg whites, that causes GI distress for people as well too, depending on who they are.
All right, I've heard of that problem before too. Yeah.
I have a really bad problem with it. So you won't see me drinking egg whites. My fiance might leave me. But so those are some of like protein factors that take into it. Now you have like it's called the PDCAAS, protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. It's basically the amino acid chains that make up the proteins.
Okay.
So like leucine, isoleucine, valine. There's a bunch of them. There's like 22-ish, plus or minus, that the human body uses. And I had them memorized at one point, but I don't know.
Yeah,
but,
you're good.
You have those strands, and those strands are like leucine, vasoleucine, isoleucine, leucine, vasoleucine, or fucking valine. Like different amino acids that clip together and they make these super long chains. And then that turns into a 3D structure, and that's what's a protein.
Okay.
And so when you use those long proteins, like when you eat those things, they're found in like we can Google it too. We put a link into it, but
yeah, we will.
You can see the line of like what the most ideal score is, and it's out of like 1 to 0. Okay. And so like the most ideal score is being a 1, or like 100% perfect for the human body consumption. And like whey protein falls under that category. Egg white protein falls under that category. Different things, but those are the chains of amino acids that make up the proteins, and those are the best for human consumption.
Okay.
And those build muscle tissue the best, basically. And then you have like down-regulated through the lines, right? So like you'll see that broccoli has protein in it, but it doesn't have the same score.
Same score as, say, that one.
Yep. And so it's not quite as an ideal protein.
Oh.
And that's when you look at the back of a vegan bottle and you'll see like soy and different, like lettuce protein, whatever.
Yeah.
They'll have a bunch of different sources of protein on the back of them because they're adding those multiple chains together. And then that's what makes a complete protein, or the better kind of form of protein.
Yeah. So what? So it makes a complete protein with the vegan one?
Yep. So when you add multiple ones together, certain ones might be missing proper amounts of leucine, or certain ones will be missing proper amounts of valine. Certain ones might be missing proper amounts of isoleucine. But if you mix 2 or 3 of them together, and then that'll give you a better amino acid complex, and then that'll be ideal for human consumption.
So and so this is kind of off topic to an extent. Rice and beans, don't those make a complete protein?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because there's protein in both, but you have to combine them for it to be complete.
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to, that just popped in my head.
I saw it click together.
Yeah, I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's why you see like vegan and vegetarians, like they mix a lot of stuff together.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
And that's so they can hit their protein goals ideally, but not something like fish or eggs or egg whites. Like you don't have to worry about it with those because they're almost perfect on this score.
Right.
Almost perfect. But like not enough to matter of a difference. But then like whey protein and egg whites are the like gold standard of human consumption proteins.
That does make sense though.
Yeah, because we probably had most access to those as we grew as a civilization.
Exactly.
Yeah. So like as you creep up in those kind of get more and more important.
Most definitely.
And then that's why like whey protein is a great supplement.
Yeah.
So, but the reason people have a problem with it is because lactose. So have one of your friends, if they're like, oh man, I really have a bad stomach ache from this, have them rip a lactate pill before they drink their protein powder, and then see if can be a lactose, and then switch to a higher quality protein. That's the hydrolyzed isolates.
Well, because I was going to talk to you too about protein powder in general, because like I switched from egg whites to protein powder, and I never had this issue before, but I am having that issue slightly. It's not like huge, but I notice it more towards nighttime for some reason.
Yeah, it could.
Okay.
Just because it's been in your system a little bit longer.
Okay.
And like post-workout and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah. So it's not super surprising, but that's why we recommend the orange bottle more than the blue bottle.
I guess. I think I have the orange bottle too.
Yeah, and it could just be like the amount of like liquid calories you're getting throughout the day.
Oh, yeah. I did. It did increase liquid. Yeah, it did.
Yeah, which isn't super surprising. It's just one of those things that it's like that, like, oh, you might fall into that fine threshold of like, no, it might be a little bit more like whole foods, like just because it gives your body a little bit more time to digest it.
So then maybe I might just need to go back to the egg whites, unfortunately. Probably.
Yeah, or you could do steak or chicken or fish. Or
We'll figure that one out.
Yeah. That's not a hard problem to figure out.
No, most definitely.
But you want to take like a 2-minute break?
Yeah, let's take a 2-minute break. We'll be on a break and we'll be right back. All right, we are back now. We took a little break. So I think for this segment of it now, we're going to go into hypertrophy training. Yeah. And this one is for bodybuilders. Yeah. Right? Okay.
Yeah. We want to asterisk a little bit for like, because I do coach strongman and I do coach powerlifting people, and I do more of their diets than I do their training program. Mm-hmm. And that's because there's a lot of stuff with like velocity, depending on who you talk to. Okay. Like velocity, the speed of a movement pattern, the movement pattern itself, how to get more efficient at the movement pattern, like things like that you focus on in those sports. Because yes, you need to be stronger. Yes, you need to be faster, all those kind of things. And you need to build more muscle tissue. But there's the the velocity of the movement, or they're like skill-based movements, right?
Right.
So like they don't maybe, they just might be able to change their biomechanics in a movement and like get their butt down a little bit more in their deadlift, or get their, whatever in their squat a little bit better, or their bracing pattern a little bit better, and like be better at the skill base of it. And that can like change their trajectory pretty significantly. Versus like adding on, 60 pounds of lean mass. Like they have a weight count. Like if you have someone who's at the top of their weight class, slowly incrementally taking their body fat down, but also increasing their power output through like, different training techniques with like speed work and stuff like that, and like making it a more skill-based movement. Okay. Whereas bodybuilding is like the opposite, right? Yeah, it's like, how can I make this significantly harder and maybe be able to use a little bit less weight but get more out of it?
Right.
And that's where like the thing, like the training programs that I really like to do that. And I treat like a training program for a bodybuilder, not the exact same at all as like a general somebody who's trying to just lose weight, but like pretty similar, because if I can maximize both of their results when it comes to weight training and muscle building, they're going to get more calories throughout the day. They're going to live a little bit longer. Their bone density is going to be a little bit better. And that's through, they're called trabecular lines.
Trabecular lines?
Yep, trabecular lines. They're basically lines of stress through bones.
Okay.
And so like when you deadlift, or when you lift a heavy load off the ground, or when you put a lot of weight on your back, like these lines in your body will start increasing the amount of bone mineral density.
Damn.
And so one of the ways that you can actually prevent osteoporosis, which is really cool, is by having people lift weights.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like you can have them, you take an old weight. So like osteoporosis is, these are going deeper than I thought they would, but
heck yeah.
They're like these small little divots in bones that start happening, and they create these little holes almost. So like if you look at bone, there's like all these little pockets and all these little divots, but those pockets and divots get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you lose bone mineral density.
Oh shoot!
You lose like calcium stores and bone density and stuff like that. As you age, if you don't have these lines of stress that are regularly being challenged. So now we drive more, we walk less, we do all of those things. And so it's more and more prevalent that they are having more and more bone problems. And that can create like, oh man, it was a crazy statistic and I can't remember what it is. And so I'm not going to misquote it, but it's some crazy percent of statistics that say that like old people die from breaking bones because they'll like step out wrong of their couch and they'll trip a little bit and they'll shatter their hip.
Right.
And that's probably an osteoporosis and aging thing. And so you can prevent that by lifting weights.
Even at older age.
Okay, awesome. You can't like completely reverse it, but you can slow its progression.
Right.
And the younger that you start, the more bone that you'll have, the denser your bone will be.
That's crazy. Okay,
and
that
so
makes sense though.
Yeah, then your bones will last way longer, which is really cool.
That is. So,
and then if you continue lifting weights, you'll still have more bone density than someone who never lifted weights in their life.
Can that be true for like, this is extreme, but for pro bodybuilders too?
Probably.
Okay, because I'm just thinking, because like I started at 17, and I mean I'm only 22, but I think I actually started lifting weights like for school around 15, but it wasn't like what I do now.
Yeah. I would assume so. There might be some other caveated conversation things like there's usually a line that you hit that like you're not going to get much more out of it at that point, but I would assume it's fairly hard to break a bodybuilder's bone.
Okay, that's why I was just asking.
But like especially for like elderly women, like, if you start really challenging the bone structure through these trabecular lines, these lines of stress through bones, then you can be able to kind of offset that bone loss. And then so they can last a lot longer because they're at a lesser risk of falling and breaking a bone.
That's crazy.
Obviously, there's like a coordination factor that goes into that too.
Of course.
If you're very, very uncoordinated, but you have stronger bones and you still fall, you still have a risk.
Yeah.
But even lifting weights, that can create like that proprioception, that like how your 3D space that you're in, it can create a little bit better and be able to kind of step a little bit more efficiently or catch yourself a little bit quicker. And like older people have a tendency to start losing that as they age.
But that makes sense though.
And that makes sense.
But lifting weights will help prevent that. That's why. That's so cool though, dude.
So cool.
I love that.
It's super exciting. So like, don't get me wrong. I'm still going to have a lady try and lift something heavy off the ground.
Yeah. Like
I'm still going to try and get you as strong as I possibly can get you. Like I might have them do more burpees and push-ups and all that kind of stuff because, like being able to lift yourself off the ground is an important skill for somebody at that age. Like if you fall and you can't stand up by yourself, like that's a risk, right?
That is a risk. Yep.
Whereas a 17 or 22, 3-year-old,
22
year old, you don't have that as much risk, but like we're going to try and maximize your gym results. So like hypertrophy in both categories is treated similar, not the exact same, but similar. Your recovery capabilities are going to be higher because you're younger. Yeah. Your recovery capabilities are going to be higher because you have more food, you have more experience, you have more training. And so like right now we're doing the DC training, which has a lot of those like rest pause sets. And so we're trying to build up as much fatigue as we can in the muscle tissue and as much kind of muscle damage in big quotations. I don't even want to go into it because I was explaining it to Gavin the other day. Like calcium channel, and they're starting to think that like calcium actually is one of the main things that causes muscle damage.
Really?
So like you have a release of calcium in the muscle tissue and that activates a couple things like tryptomyosin, and then that allows your muscle tissue to open, and then you have actin and myosin, that cross bridge, and then that's what slowly creeps the muscle tissue along, and so there's just like this little ladder thing that happens in the muscle, and that's how they slowly shrink in.
Damn.
And the individual muscle fibers are like called sarcomeres, and so they kind of squish together, and that's what causes muscle tissue contraction. And so you see the shrinking of the muscle tissue, and that's what causes your hand to move up. It's like a whole bunch of these individual units like shrinking together like this. Yeah. And then that's what causes contractions. But one of the main cascade portions of that through a couple different things, like electrolytes is a reason because they cause electrical currents, and then that releases calcium, and that opens up all these channels. But they're starting to think it's like a calcium ion thing that causes a little bit of damage when like white blood cells come in and clear that out. I'm really, really foggy on that because it's kind of new-ish. Oh, okay. Not super new, but originally the thought was like, I lift weights and these little sarcomeres break and then that gets repaired. And it's like, it's not quite like that.
No.
But the 3 pillars of hypertrophy, I guess not that wrong, is like muscle damage, which seems to be the least important one out of all of them.
The least important?
The least important.
Okay.
And so that's going to be like what we had just talked about. And then you have, because like, for example, right, if I stand there and I punch in the arm 150 times and your arm turns black and blue, is that going to make your muscle tissue grow?
Probably not.
Probably not, right?
Probably not. Yeah.
Probably not. Probably.
Probably
not.
Probably.
So, and that's just a key example of like, okay, I break these muscle fiber units. Is that really going to cause growth?
Oh, not really.
Not really, right?
Not really. Okay.
Okay. Light bulb moment, huh?
Yeah.
And then you have metabolic stress, which is the burn. So muscle tissue damage is like, oh, how sore am I after my workout? Like, oh, how much does it hurt to really raise my bicep? Like, damn, that really hurts.
Yeah.
And you have metabolic stress, which is the idea like if you do a whole bunch of reps in one sitting, and your muscle really, really, really burns, like, is that a sign of like muscle growth? Like, kind of, sort of. It seems a little bit more important than muscle damage, but it doesn't seem to be the main like kind of causational effect of muscle growth. And then you have mechanical tension, which is like load on the muscle tissue increasing over time, with some asterisks added into each category for sure. Okay. But as the load increases, that seems to create more and more tension inside the muscle tissue, and that's what causes growth, right?
And I think I'm even noticing that with myself though, because I was talking to you, we were like in training. I started training. I'm like, dude, like, I don't feel like I'm as sore anymore. And you're like, no, because you're not supposed to an extent. Yeah. Like you're gonna be a little sore, but it wasn't as much as before. But that's when I started growing the most, because over time it was handling more and more and more. Yep. So. And
just because you do, like, there's a threshold, right, with anything, like diminishing returns is kind of what it's called. Yeah. It's like, okay, like from here to here, you're gonna get a lot of results. Yep. And this is, 3 sets or 4 sets of muscle group per week. And then you have, okay, like, but if I do 6 sets, I get slightly more, but I get a lot more fatigued and I can't train as often. But it's like, if I do 30 sets, like 30 sets probably isn't going to really be much better than 8 sets. No. Or whatever maybe that threshold for that specific person might be. Right. So there's a bunch of different factors that can go into it across the board. So like with DC training, like you're like, oh, we can increase the volume. It's like, no, we're growing at a great rate right now. Like we might in the future, but probably not quite yet. Yeah. Just because like we're taking more rest days, we're doing all that kind of stuff. And so it's giving your body more of a chance to grow over time and reduce the fatigue and like allow you to like have more output in a training session and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was going to cut you off. The one thing I thought too was like, even on paper, I looked at it, I'm like, there is no way, because I used to train 5 to 6 days a week. Because like, honestly, I think DC is when I actually started to like write everything down. Because beforehand, I would just go in and train super, super hard. So I think what I was talking to you about, I think that I ended up way overtraining than necessary, because the way that my mindset works is, I have to leave the gym just broken. And then I go into this year and I'm not feeling the way that I used to, but I'm actually gaining better results. It's absolutely nuts to me.
Yeah. And it's like one of those like key factors too with somebody, like you use the word overtraining. And it's like, sure, you could be overtraining, like, but you could be under recovering. Like, what does overtraining really mean to somebody, right? Yeah. And so, like, you might have the people inside the gym, and I don't think it's I don't hear it very often anymore, which is cool. But there's a lot of people like, oh man, I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to overtrain. And it's like, well, like, I'd rather you getting on that cusp of overtraining than underdoing it. So like that's kind of that caveat where it's like, okay, like I would much rather have to pull somebody back from training than I would rather have to push you to train harder.
100%.
And it's so hard to get somebody to train like tell, hey, I can't stand up on the pendulum squat anymore. I can't I can't get the barbell off my chest on a bench press, right? It's that proximity to failure is kind of mechanical tension. Is the like, how close am I going to get to failure of like, I can't do this rep very clean anymore. And that's that key is it's like, okay, like once I like fully tax out mechanical tension and like I can't do that rep anymore, like that's probably where you grow the most from it. Okay. But now it's like, okay, if I repeat my bench press set of, I don't even know, 135, right? Let's just say 135. Yeah. And I can only do 12 reps on my first set. And that gets me mechanical. Like I fail on that 12th rep. You fail on that 12th. Can't do anymore, right? Now, if I go do that 7 more times, it's probably not going to be nearly as helpful. You're probably not going to recover nearly as much. You're probably going to kind of create a bigger hole than you can kind of dig yourself out of. You're probably not getting the same stimulus from your body. Like that 1 or 2 sets of doing that is probably just as good, if not better, than doing 7 sets of it.
Okay.
right? Like in DC
Right.
training, right?
Yeah.
You have a couple sets that you're doing,
Yep.
and you're being able to recover from those sets, spending enough time for your body to kind of relax and be able to get back into it, taking 3 to 5 minutes, 3 to 6 minutes in between those crazy sets.
Yep.
I've been like, okay, now I'm ready, fully energized, ready to go hammer this set again, and then be able to get it. But they're not having you do 9 total sets in that working group,
No,
right?
absolutely not. No.
And that would just be too much. Like that would be, there's no reason for that.
It would be way too much. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, like every once in a while, I like doing 3 or 4 or 5 sets of something. I mean, like, okay, like let's like that's more like building character than it is really kind of building muscle tissue in that time frame.
I like that. That makes sense.
It's like, okay, how far can you actually push it? And then it's like, we'll pull back from there kind of thing.
Right.
But like finding someone's recoverable volume can be important too. Like you kind of,
sure.
there's a bunch of like, you know, how's your sleep been? How's your recovery been? How's your muscle soreness been? How's like a bunch of different factors in your training program or in your check-in that is like, okay, what can we do with this data? You know, do we need more food? Are you growing at a proper rate? Like what's going on specifically for you and your body at the time frame? How's your appetite doing? That might be a sign of overtraining.
Oh wow.
Or under recovering.
Under recovering. Yeah.
Right. Like so like there's a bunch of different factors that go into a training program to be able to like, okay, what can I maximize with that person? Number one characteristic for it is like, what do you like to do? Like if I might be able to write you the perfect program that's going to give you 103% gains over 5 years. But if you go into the gym and you hate every workout of it, you're not going to train nearly as hard as you need to get the maximum result. You might be able to do it for 3 or 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever. But like at a certain point, you're like, dude, this sucks. Like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Exactly.
So like finding something that somebody actually likes to do and then making sure that they're progressing in it. Like, so 1 week you do 135 for 10 reps. And that was, okay, the 10th rep, ooh, I can't get it up anymore. Boom. Okay. You know, you go back to, you know, on week 2, you go back and you do it and you get it for 11 reps. Well, you progressed. Sweet. Like, okay, things are working. 1 to 2 reps a week is awesome.
Yeah.
You go 135, you know, we have you doing 3 total sets. And then you do 10, 8, 6. The next week you do 11, 9, 7. And then the week after you do 13, 9, 6. It's like, well, you kind of progressed, but you progressed on those first 2 movements. So you're still heading in the right direction. It's just on that last one, you're probably a little bit more fatigued.
Right.
And so a lot of factors like, okay, maybe we're not even getting very much out of that 3rd set. So let's get rid of that 3rd set. And then you go back and you hit it for 14 reps.
Oh,
and then so
I see what you're saying. So you're just, over time, you're just based on the data, you're just perfecting it in a sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then over a course of a good period of time, you can kind of see what changes.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, you know, a lot of specifics go into that too with like very individualized things. But
of course.
There's a lot of things that like a lot of people, you know, you're still going to progress in those 3 sets because you're a little bit newer to training or like, you know, the younger you are in your training career, you probably can handle a little bit more volume and you're still going to recover at the same rate because your central nervous system doesn't have as much fatigue.
Exactly. Yep.
And once you start getting to a point where it's like, "Whoo, man, it's 405 on incline this week," like you might only need 1 or 2 sets on there to maximize that full response on muscle tissue because you're so experienced training, because you have such a good mind-muscle connection, because you have extra tissue, because your central nervous system gets fatigued. Like all those factors can play into why you're only maybe doing 1 set on certain things. Trained by JP is very, very specific in his training. It's like my favorite thing. He's also been in his body for 25 years.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
He's been doing this, you know, professionally with himself for so long that big top set, back off set. So top set being, you know, slightly heavier load for slightly less reps, and the second set being slightly lighter load and slightly more reps, and kind of getting a little bit more out, like just trying to maximize that progressive proximity to failure. Like how close can you get to not doing that rep again? That stuff really adds up, I think.
And I've noticed that too. Like we're talking about also enjoyment of training. So the thing with DC training is, this is gonna sound kind of weird. I wouldn't say I love it, but I wouldn't say I hate it. I'm like right in the middle of like, this gets me results. It's new and it's challenging. So that's what makes it fun for me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and like we might be able to get away with doing this for the next 8 months.
I hope so.
Or, well, it's even to the point where it's like, hey, the results are so good, I'm willing to do this as long as I'm getting the same result out of it. If I start progressing or stalling, I want to change things up. That's something that we can always do.
Yeah.
And that's that coaching conversation. It's like, man, I've been doing this program for a really long time. Like, can we adjust some stuff? Can we change a movement? You know? Or, hey, man, I freaking love this program, but I'm so tired of Smith squats. Can we do regular barbell squats? Right. So, like, maybe I'm not progressing on the Smith squat anymore because I'm just, you know, repetitive movement and repetitive movement injury can kind of become a thing to some degree if you do it long enough. And so let's swap that out for the same movement pattern to some degree, plus or minus. and injury prevention and a lot of other factors. But let's swap that movement pattern out for something that's real similar that we know is going to slam your quads and glutes, like a Smith squat would.
Yep.
Same thing a barbell squat to some degree, but you're just changing the movement pattern so it's fresh, it's new, it's something fun for you to do.
Yeah, most definitely.
And so I have no problem changing stuff like that.
And it makes sense. And another thing, when you're running, I don't know if you call them training cycles or like how many weeks you run training programs, but like how long do you want to, like, so for example, for me, how many cycles of training are we going to do of DC, do you think? Like, does that make any sense to you?
Usually, I don't change it a ton because if someone's still progressing with the same program, I'm probably not going to change it a lot.
Okay.
It's once either they get bored of it, or if we start seeing like a diminishing return of gains, muscle tissue growth, or the third one was, I think I might have already said it, but it's like if they get bored of it. And so it's like, okay, hey, I'm ready to try something new. We're not getting the same result. Or, hey, my central nervous system is getting way too beat up. Let's back off a day. And so like I'm flexible on like how each individual, like in each person kind of trains. And so like how they're going to kind of progress that over time. Because like you might have somebody who like, you didn't need a deload for like 12 weeks, 13 weeks, right? Yeah. But then it's like, oh man, all of a sudden like I could really use that 4 days off of training. But you might be able to keep that up for like 6 months or 8 months or whatever it may be. Each individual person has their own kind of threshold of like, oof. They got a call this weekend from one of the guys, and I was like, last weekend. Yeah. And I was like, hey man, I need you to take 4 days off training. Yep. And he's like, yeah, we're gonna deload. So like, how many sets do you want me to do? And I was like, no, I don't want you to go into the gym for 4 days unless you're doing cardio. And he's like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, you're gonna feel so much better.
Oh yeah.
And then he took 4 days off training. He's like, dude, I feel like I've never had these pumps the same way again. Yeah. And so it was that fine line of like, all right, your sleep went to crap. Your hunger signals are off again. Like you're not recovering the same way. The soreness isn't hitting as hard. And so giving his body that good break to be able to kind of like, hey, let's take that small chunk of time. Let's get away from the gym, go have a little bit more steps, and then be able to be like, okay, now he comes back and he's like, dude, I'm slammed again. Like this is insane.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that gave him the break that he needed.
Most definitely.
And he didn't want to do that. That's what we did.
Well, and like it too, again, it lets you kind of like fall back into making sure you're getting maybe a little more sleep now, and maybe just the extra little T's are crossed, and then go back and kill it.
And that stress reduction can help a ton for people.
Well, yeah, and I think with what we had to do was just a bunch of water inflammation in the lower calves. Yeah, and
so we were having some odd stuff go on. So for you, it was like a touch bit different. And it was like, this is a great time for us to take a little bit of a break, get some like a little bit less food inside the system, give your body a chance to recover, which I normally don't drop food for somebody when they're in a deload. But for you, that's what I thought was the best case scenario. And it worked really, really well.
It did.
And then your training sessions that probably come after the deload are going to be insane.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So it'll be a lot of fun. We took plenty of days off.
Yeah. This next week is going to be nuts.
Yeah. And you're going to hopefully still see that still wild progression.
Oh no, for sure. Like I even felt it during training though. Like I literally I just felt like gross in the gym. Like I would push hard, but it didn't feel the same as like we're pushing. This is awesome. It was like pushing, but I was like really trying to dig out some stuff in me. Like
I am now just focused on hate at this moment instead of like having fun. Like
I'm just thinking about the bet, like my bet at that point.
Yeah. And that's another sign of like needing a deload is like training isn't as fun as it was.
No, like I said, the best way I've explained it is my whole body just feels achy and gross. That's the best way that I put it for myself.
Yeah. So. And now we have that data too, where it's like, this is how many weeks it took us to get to the spot. And then we might be ahead of the curve next time. Or we might just be able to, food's still super high, still feel super great. Let's keep going.
And I'm excited to see how much longer we can go this time around though. Yeah, because I think the only break I really took was maybe a week after my competition, but I was still kind of in the gym, so I never actually really got to take a break from anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you had like 3 days before the show that you weren't training super hard.
That's true.
And like 4 days after the show that you were like kind of doing pumpy stuff.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gives your body a break, which is like sometimes what I'll have people do is their deload is they'll do like one top set, like one hard set on each movement. And then it's like the rest of it's like, no, I don't want you to go. Like once it starts burning, I want you to stop. But that keeps them inside the gym. That keeps them like mentally focused on the goal. Because like if some people don't have a gym, then they're just like, what's the point? Like I'm just not even gonna eat on diet.
Oh yeah. So no, most definitely. Yeah. Well, is there anything else in the training realm of things we wanted to kind of go over, or?
not so much for like bodybuilders so much, but like it depends on the person to some degree. Like for general fitness, there's like if you're just getting into like fitness and you're just getting into the gym and you're just getting into training, we should probably have started with this, but it's finding what you're going to have the most fun doing, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's bodybuilding trials training, whether it's HIIT style training, whether it's classes, whatever it may be. Like all of those things are going to be beneficial, but you need to lift up weights and you need to use them in some way. And I don't want to see like 3-pound dumbbell curls. Like you need to start loading the muscle tissue because that's what's going to challenge it to grow.
Most definitely.
And that can be with body weight, and that can be with burpees, and that can be with HIIT. And you can do a combination of HIIT training and you can do a combination of lifting weights. You can do like, HIIT one day, day 2 be lifting weights, day 3 be HIIT, day 4 be lifting weights, day 5 you take a rest, day 6 you repeat. And like, you can do all those stuff and it's super, super good for you, but you need to move, you need to get the heart rate up, you need to do what makes it fun, because if it's not fun for you in any aspect, you're not going to stick to it very long.
That makes sense.
And the longer you stick to it, the more results you're going to see, and that's what's going to get you hooked. Like I have a lady that started and she could only do 5 burpees.
Jeez.
And she's like, man, this sucks. Like I'm sweaty. It's not fun. I'm not having a good time. But then the next time she did, got 7 burpees. And then she got 10 burpees. And then now she's doing 15 burpees. And she's like, I'm still a sweaty mess. And this is still super hard.
Yeah.
But like, I can see that progression. Like
that's crazy though.
I didn't drop as much weight as I thought this week. But now I'm doing 15 burpees when before I'd only do 5. And so you see this cool progression with people. And then that's what gets them kind of hooked on the activity and the movement. It's like, oh, if I put some money into this, I'm going to get something out of it.
Exactly. 100%, dude.
So do what makes you happy.
Do what makes you happy.
Push, pull legs, upper, lower, full body, bro split.
Can I tell you what? When I first got into training, the very first time I ever lifted weights, I followed Arnold Schwarzenegger's blueprint for 12 weeks straight. It was a whole summertime, so I was 17. It was just about how summer was just right here. And I was like, what's the best training program? And I looked up Arnold's. I literally did it to a T on the app too, bro. I don't know what happened, but it works.
So, okay, this is quite a cool
loved
topic.
it. I liked it. Enjoyed it.
There's nothing wrong with Arnold's program, so don't say that I'm bashing on it at all. But like, you can do a ton of things wrong in your first year and still grow.
It was, and that's a perfect example.
Like, your form doesn't have to be perfect. Your mind to muscle connection doesn't have to be perfect because your body has never had that level of stress before.
Yeah.
It's going to respond, and like the best results you're probably ever going to be getting is in the first year and a half of training.
Oh, yeah.
Plus or minus, depending on the person. But like, that's when you're going to get the most results. And then after that, it's a grind. Then you have to get better and better and better in the training. You have to get more focused on the reps. You have to get closer to failure. You have to do all that stuff. Because like in your first year of training, like you can get nowhere close to failure. You can get nowhere close to training super hard. You can do, do too much or do too little, and you're still going to respond really, really well. Yep. And you're still going to grow muscle tissue and have a lot of cool stuff happen in that first year just because your body's never had that stress before.
Man, that's what, I mean, obviously we're still making progress, but that's the one thing I kind of missed was like the innocence of it almost, because like I didn't know better than that. But like
newbie gains, it's great.
But newbie gains, dude, I remember like it felt like almost each week was just something brand new. Like I remember a weird tradition I had, but like I would purposely not take the pump cover off until after I was in. And I did that and I saw each week it was just more and more and more. And then after that year, that's when I was like, I
gotta really figure this out. Yeah.
No, it was.
But yeah, you'll watch a dude start barely being able to do the bar plus a 10, but in that first 6 months he'll be benching 135 for reps.
Yep.
Which is like crazy. Like you don't see very many people going from like 225 to 315 within a 4-month window.
No, you don't.
You really, really don't see it very often. Or like even 315 to 405. Like you never see that happen. But like that first year. Dudes get up to 185 super quick, and they're like, dude, I'll keep this up 2 more years on 315 bench. And it's like, ooh, the diminishing returns really start. Like, it takes a lot slower after that. So.
It is weird how it works. So I remember when I first started, like, I couldn't even press. I had a hard time with the bar, had a hard time with 10s, and then I got up to plate 225. But then after that 225, for me at least, because it took a while to get there, flatline.
It's just, and then you got to grind away at it week by week.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm adding 2 reps this week.
Yeah.
I added a rep. This is amazing. So,
and when we're talking about like progressive overload too, you really got to push for it though. You can't just like magically one thing that I noticed too is like it's not just going to magically happen. You still have to push for it, and that's when the magic happens. If that makes any sense, you know what I mean?
You really and it sounds weird, but like that proximity to failure is like the least fun place to be. You're on that last rep and you're like, wow, I really, really can't do this, but I'm trying everything in my power to get that last rep up. Like that really sucks.
It does.
But that's like you get the most out of like you like in the grand scheme of things, like the first 5 reps in your set, if you're doing a 10 rep set, like matter very, very little.
Yeah.
The next 2 to 3, they matter a lot more than the first 5 do, but they don't even compare to the last 1 or 2 reps.
Not one bit.
Yeah. If true failure is that 10th rep, like life sucks in that 10th rep, but that's what's going to give you the most results. Like that rep matters more than the first 9.
No, 100%. But it takes that many reps to get there. Like the one thing when I was increasing even weight too, it's like, okay, all these reps were easy. Why isn't this getting hard? Oh shit! Like this is hard. But that's when I remember you even saying too. It's like that's the most important rep. You want to not fuck that one up.
Those are the ones that's like everyone that hurts is like that's one. Don't start counting when it hurts, as great of a motto as that is, because you need to know how many reps you did. So when you go back and do it again, you got to get more.
Yep.
But then that's the big key. Like, man, I did 10 last week. Man, I really have to get that 11th rep this week. And that grind rep's the 11th rep. Like where if you could have quit and not known you've done 10 and then you're not progressed. And then the week after you do 12 reps instead of doing the 10 from 2 weeks before. But if you wouldn't have tracked, you might still have stopped at 10.
That's that's so true. Yeah. Then that's the importance of writing it down so you know where you were exactly each time.
Yeah. And the app that I use will tell you exactly how much weight, how many reps you did. So.
But in this case, it took me to write it down. But most people, the app is amazing.
Yeah,
it so is. Great.
But we talked about like specifically for like you is like you show up to the gym, you sit inside your car, you drink your pre-workout, you eat your Rice Krispie treat, you write what you did last time down. So you just everything is focused about going and training from the moment you get to the gym, the moment you leave the gym, and it's all focused on like I have to beat these numbers. I have to do everything in my power to beat these numbers, and it's paid off.
It is, but then another thing that made me enjoy it more though is exactly what you said. I made a new routine with the training program, and that whole new routine, it just changed everything because we switched things up from doing what we did before. Yep. So, 100%, dude. Well,
let's get this done.
I think that was really good, bro. We went over a lot today. Make sure I'm gonna keep saying this. There's a button called rewind. You might want to rewind it a few times and write down some notes because people that listen, you're gonna make some big changes. And if you heard this and you're overwhelmed, that's perfectly fine. You're not crazy. Go talk to this guy.
Shoot me a message.
Yes.
We can always like either set up time for like call or we can do like voice messaging or whatever it may be or text. It's fine.
100%. And you guys know where to find me. I will put his information down below. You guys have a blessed day. Keep kicking ass and stay tuned for more.